Hello everyone, I am Chef Andy from Common Threads. I am based out of Chicago, and today we're going to be working on some healthy recipes, plant-based tacos. We have all of our ingredients here, and we have some tortillas here that we're going to be kind of showcasing how to cook with like veggies. We're going to go, I guess we're going to go from there. But the first thing I wanted us to kind of get together would be the ingredients. So if you're going to follow along, let's do it. If you're still just watching the video or you're trying to educate yourself on some recipes prior to cooking, I do recommend kind of reading over the recipes that you'll get. I'll be doing some alterations, mostly because as a chef, I don't like to waste any of the product. So if the recipe calls for some things, that's okay. You can always cook it the next day if you need to. But we're gonna get right into our ingredients so that you know what's happening. For those that do not like certain ingredients, I always love to do substitution. So do not feel that you have to stick to one ingredient all the time. You can alter it as many times as you want. But the plan here is to have potatoes. I have an Oriental potato and a regular sweet potato. This is just for, video purposes where you can kind of understand that you can use different veggies. It doesn't always have to be the same. So if you're like a little confused about the potatoes, just find what you can get from the store. Yam, sweet potato works for this. The other stuff is our aromatics. We have celery stalk that still has the leaves, which I will be using as opposed to just kind of throwing away the little leaves. Most of the time they are edibles, so don't waste them if you don't have to. We have some regular garlic cloves. You can buy them minced, peeled, whatever is easier for you, but I always prefer the fresh stuff. It's good for the tummy, especially with real garlic as opposed to the jar garlic that comes like with preservatives and things like that that you don't want in your body. We have onion, and then for the canned stuff, we have regular black beans. I actually go for the ones that have like reduced low sodium. Mostly because I don't want a lot of salt in my food. I am trying to cook healthier. I'm trying to incorporate lots of the natural flavors that come from these vegetables. The other thing here, it's the corn that you can buy canned. You can buy them already like shucked. You can buy them however you want, but I always prefer to use regular fresh corn. Because growing up in Mexico and growing up here in Chicago in the US, I always kind of get different memories of different corn tasting different. So I always like to go back, especially through the smells, through the taste, and I like to go back to my roots where I remember like my mom and grandma cooking in Mexico and using like fresh corn. You don't have to feel that you have to always cook the freshest stuff because you can cook with ease. So if you want to buy canned stuff, that's okay. If you want to buy whatever you want to buy, it's up to you. So don't, and I say this, don't feel that you have to always buy things that go on recipes. I love recipes as a guideline because I can refer back to it. So if I had it here, I can read over it. If you're like me and you like to make sure that you develop like the skills for cooking, for tasting, that you don't really have to rely on recipes. As far as measurements, you will still get the measurements of what I'm going to be doing, similar to the recipe that you'll get as reference. But yeah, this is it. All the veggies we have here. And before we kind of cut to like the prepping aspect of class, we're going to start preheating the oven. So preheating the oven to 425. That's going to be one easy step for us so that as we're prepping other things, we can roast the sweet potatoes in the oven, which I'm going to do right now. 425 Fahrenheit, it's always the best. It's high temperature, it cooks it faster, and it kind of caramelizes the sweet potato or any starchy veggie that you want to roast to get those flavors. A few other techniques that I'll be talking about during this class or alternative ways of cooking things would be steaming. So if you have like a little steamer or you have like a pot with water and the little steamer that goes on top of it, like the one that you get for pasta, you can steam the potatoes so that you don't have to work with oil. I think sometimes we get so used to the idea that we have to always oil things and saute, which is the most commonly way of cooking. It's to saute. The other way would be roasting, baking, and then the other way would be grilling. I'm not trying to give you all this information to overwhelm you, so if you want to skip to use like the cooking part, that is totally okay. But this is just a little introduction for those that want to apply different cooking techniques to their cuisine. It's healthier. It's always easier too. So if you're like multitasking or you have a lot of things going on throughout the day, boom, pop them in the oven. If you can keep an eye on the stove top and you're there sauteing, that's another way. It cooks the fastest. If you have like a grill, indoor grill, use your favorite method. But I'm going to be using the oven to roast potatoes. I'll teach you how to do that in a little bit. And then I'll eventually get some color on them towards the end when we're like finishing up everything. Let's see what else. Yeah, I think that's it. I think we can kind of get into knife skills, how to break down all the veggies that we have. We'll be making like a easy taco seasoning from scratch. You don't have to go to the store and buy. I'm sure most of the time we own these spices, so you don't have to buy the packet that's overpowered by some flavors. So in this case, I don't like when it's so overpowered by cumin. That's a little more on the Tex-Mex, Mexican side of flavors. And I like to really showcase the importance of veggies. Veggies themselves do not need a lot of seasoning. So if you can extract the sweetness from the corn, the aromatics from the garlic, the celery, the onion, and then, the sweetness from also the sweet potatoes and the crunch from the potatoes, all these different things will definitely make your plate taste better without ever feeling that you're overwhelmed, trying to marinate, season things. So let's get right to it, guys. All right, so the first thing we're gonna be doing is peeling my potatoes. I washed them really good. I have a little brush, so I try to scrub all my root vegetables because they do retain lots of soil, which I don't think it's a bad thing if you have a little bit of soil, because we do eat a lot of things that come from the ground, but you don't want to add that as your seasoning to your food. So for those that are unfamiliar with peeling potatoes, I always prefer something similar to this as opposed to the longer peelers. Nothing too fancy. So we're gonna start peeling the skin. If you want to keep the skin for the extra flavor, go for it. But here, just to show you guys, peeler is super sharp. I like these. It's one of those things with the handles. It's different however you want to hold it. The other ones that are longer, sometimes I don't really like those. So these are pretty versatile for all types of hands or methods. So first potato I'm peeling, it's the regular sweet potato. Looks orange, so I think most of us are familiar with it. And the other one, it's considered an Oriental sweet potato. So all these peels here, I wouldn't really waste them. I would even add this as a crispy component for our taco if I was to get a little fancy on the garnishes. You don't have to. Again, these are his ideas on how to maximize when you're cooking, how to use the leftovers. The other one I'm going to be peeling, it's going to be a regular Oriental. Sorry, that scared me. Sorry about that. Oriental sweet potato. These are a little more on the starchy side, but it's definitely, something that I prefer to use over regular potatoes. Regular potatoes have a lot of sugars, very starchy. Not always the best option to always eat regular potatoes. So try to mix up your root vegetables. Now that we're done peeling both of these, I'm going to save the scraps for later. I'm not going to use them for this demo, but I'm definitely going to save them for later, because then you can make like a vegetable stock, fry them like we mentioned, or I don't know, get creative. We're going to go into some knife skills. So for those that really need a refresher course on your knife skills, and if you've never really put that much attention to how things should be cut, I think this is a proper kind of demo for this. So I'm using a Western style knife, a little bit on the bigger side. The thickness of the blade's always good for like chicken, potatoes, things that are hard to cut without chipping your knife. And by that I mean some home knives tend to be very delicate, like the blades are very thin. I have a Japanese blade here, super thin blade, so that can chip sometimes if I try to cut through bone, like on chicken. So anything that's a little on the hard side, I always prefer something that I know has a thicker blade. But let's kind of get right into cutting this. So for the sweet potatoes, we're gonna make like long strips. I'm using like my claw, my fingers as a claw. The way I'm pinching the knife really makes a difference. You can either use handle or pinch here. That's mostly to get the slicing motion. So I'm gonna go 1 and 2 cuts, and I'm gonna end up with about 3 pieces kind of lengthwise for the sweet potato. Then I'm gonna just like lay them flat. Remember, these are a little harder to cut, so you have to really apply some pressure. So if you're having issues, once your knife's in there, you can kind of use the cleaver method, and boom, you're done. That's basically it for sweet potato. And I don't want to bore you guys with all these like sweet potato knife skills. So we're gonna stop here, and then I'll keep moving down the other veggies. Once we're done chopping everything together, I'll give you guys I guess the rundown of how things are gonna get cooked. So let's move on to the next thing. All right, so while we were kind of cutting the other items, so the sweet potatoes, I did grab like a little cookie tray. I'm gonna put all my sweet potatoes in here. So that was about 2 potatoes, the size of my hand. The recipe will call for about like 3/4 of a pound. It's literally about 2 small sweet potatoes, and it'll yield you a nice amount from 4 to 6 yields of like feeding people. So we're gonna toss a little bit of oil. I'm gonna go light on oil, so about like a tablespoon of oil that we'll drizzle on here. If you need measurement spoons, go for it. As a trained professional, I kind of always have an idea of how much things I should add to things, but add about like a tablespoon of oil. I'm gonna sprinkle a little bit of salt. That would be like close to about half a teaspoon. We're gonna toss it together, and we're gonna pop that into the oven, all right? Use a light toss. Not a lot of oil. We want this to be crunchy, but we also want to make it healthy. Oils are good for cooking things that need fat, but you're roasting this, so it doesn't need a lot of fat. So we're gonna pop this into the oven for about 20 minutes or so, and then yeah, we'll go from there down the list, all right guys? All right, next item is gonna be the celery stalk. Remember, we are gonna keep the little leaves, so if you ever buy it and you throw it away, don't. Let's just kind of make sure that we wash it prior to like cutting it. I magically made my cutting board clean itself while we were popping the things into the oven, so the sweet potatoes. You already have the rundown of the knife skills and how to slice and how to hold everything. So I'm not really going to go into knife skills. Now I'm just going to show you guys how to break down each item. So the celery, we're just going to go on a bias cut. So that's considered an angle cut. Same slicing motion that we were doing earlier with the potatoes. We're just going on a bias cut. So that just makes the cuts look a little like longer and fancier. You can kind of smell the celery. So I think that's an awesome aromatic, which also adds a nice little crunch. Here's a good example in case you need to see how the cuts are cut on a bias cut. The herbs are still there. We'll start moving things to our little like cutting board or cookie tray or bowls, whatever you prefer to use to keep things together. This is called our mise en place. Our mise en place, it's just something that's engraved into our brains in culinary school and as chefs. It just means have everything prepped out, laid out. It really makes a big difference. It'll save your life. So we are done with the celery. Now we're gonna move over to garlic. So for the garlic, I mentioned earlier, you can buy peeled garlic, you can buy minced garlic, but nothing tastes as awesome as fresh garlic. So instead of always just relying on things like grocery or things that are bought from the store that already come peeled, I don't like to waste things. So I buy a head of clove that will last me weeks, as opposed to peeled garlic that's going to last me a week because I forgot about it and it molds. So for the garlic, we're going to go for a mince. But instead of crushing the garlic, we're going to cut off the two little sides. So that's the little end, called the root. And then we're just going to peel it like a banana. Oh, super easy to peel. There's other hacks that are out there, so if you guys ever need any other tips, feel free to email me, but I use like this little garlic roller that peels it for you. We're gonna go and move on to the slicing / chopping. So I'm gonna apply what I've been learning or teaching, and we're gonna go slices. So they're gonna look like little chips. So now that we master the slicing, I focus a lot on knife skills because that makes cooking a lot easier. So if you're not good with knives and you have like uneven cuts, things cook differently all the time. So we're gonna just slice the garlic, and now I'm gonna teach you guys how to chop. So now with chopping, I always like to keep the thumb away from down here so you can kind of do this hand motion. We're gonna chop this really fine, or you can keep slicing still if you develop the skills that you want with knives. Once we get to like a very fine chop, then we're basically done with the garlic. I can even do this with one hand. Just make sure you're not really like scraping too hard on the knife because I don't want you guys to cut yourselves. Rub chop, it doesn't have to be minced. Once it's minced, it's too small, it doesn't have any texture. I know other chefs might say something different, but I love texture and flavors. So I do not want to lose that texture. So slowly scrape your product into your cookie tray. For those that do this a lot, be super careful because you'll start picking up plastic or wood from scraping. So instead, I always recommend lightly or just grab them with your hands and try to not scrape too hard. I'm going to give my knife a little wipe. I don't want all those veggies sticking to it, especially if you're like doing multiple different things. You want to make sure that you're always clean as you go. Alright, so we're done with the garlic. We only needed one clove. One clove to me means a big clove, but to you guys it might mean two cloves if they're a little smaller. So we're going to move on to the onion. The onion has two parts, the top and the root. The root tends to be a little hairy, so I always say keep it intact. So let's just slice off the top. You're going to expose all the layers, so I'm going to stand it flat now. And from the root side, I'm going to give it a little cleaver method that I taught you guys. And we're going to cut it down the center because we only need half. The good thing about, I guess, scraps with onions is that you can put this in like a vegetable stock, and the skin, all the little scraps that you probably wouldn't use still have flavor, so they have purpose. So stop buying like chicken stock or veggie stock when you can make it with all the scraps from everything you cook throughout the week. You can put them in a freezer bag. This usually allows, your onion to be peeled faster. So the reason we cut it that way is so I can expose all the layers and I can pull it. And now we're gonna go quick rub chop. So I'm gonna go horizontally and then vertically. So keeping like my fingers away from the knife, I'm kind of using the palm, and I'm gonna make sure I know where I'm going. I'm gonna start to do like the serrated motion that almost goes to the root, but not all the way. So I did 3 cuts, and now I'm about to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 vertical cuts. Now what happened is that it basically cut it for you, and it's still intact, and it's gonna make it a lot easier so that you can just get a small dice on it, and you can kind of see how even everything ended up being cut. It's all kind of falling apart. Nice little small dice. the rest of your onion. Like let's say you're not using the rest of it, you can save it, but it keeps your onion intact. Also saves you from those tears. So typically when you chop things like onions, they release all these little gases that eventually end up irritating your eyes. I have very sensitive eyes, so I have to be super careful not to chop a lot, and boom, just get it done, out the way, and you're done. So now we have onions chopped. We have our celery, garlic. The last two things that you guys are going to be doing would be the black beans and the corn. Remember, the corn doesn't have to be fresh, so you wouldn't really need to do this if you didn't want to. This is just like an extra step that I'm going to be doing just because of the freshness of the corn and the natural sweetness. That way we can still have a little bit of sweetness and we don't have to always do the canned stuff with all the added sugars and sodium. Alright, so I have some fresh corn. I'm going to cut it down the middle. Then I'm going to start slicing all the little kernels. I would usually do this on top like of a bowl so that it falls on there, or else it's going to kind of sprinkle everywhere. So you just be careful with that. Those using canned corn, all you have to do is just kind of strain it. I'll show you guys that with beans, but I at least wanted to kind of inspire you guys to like taste food in its natural state. So mostly everything's safe to eat if it's a veggie, and if it's raw, good, sweet. So that's basically it for the corn portion. Show you guys the beans in a little bit. We're gonna finish up our mise en place, and then we'll go from there again. All right, we're almost there, I promise. So we are down to our last major ingredient, which is beans. I'm just gonna grab them off the can. There's a lot of juice. I'm gonna pass it through like a little colander or strainer. I'm gonna allow all the juice to basically just run through. You can rinse it off with cold water if you need to, but I don't want a lot of extra moisture once I'm cooking. There's some residual moisture. So I'm just gonna make sure that all the excess starchy sodium from the beans you strain off into a bowl, and that's it. And we're basically done, and I'll give you guys a recap of the ingredients. Alright, so we're done with all the prep. Once we start cooking, we'll throw the seasoning, and I'll show you guys how to do that, but we have about half chopped onion, we have half a cup of the corn, 1 celery stalk, and 1 garlic clove. And then I'm using a small can of the black beans on top of the 2 sweet potatoes that should be cooking right now. Keep an eye on those. I'll eventually bring it out so you guys can see it. But they should cook at least for 20 minutes at 425. Halfway through the cooking, we'll kind of mix it, and I'll bring them out in a little bit so you can see the color. But that's the remainder of the ingredients. We're going to start doing some real cooking, so get your stuff. I'll give you guys some pointers on the tools to use. I always like to either use a rubber spatula or wood spoon, never metal. It scratches your pots and pans. So we're going to start by preheating our pans. So find a nice like saute pan, depending on how much you're going to cook. If you want more portions, then bigger pot or pan. This is about a 9-inch saute pan. Stainless steel, because I like browning. I'm going to go about medium heats. Medium heat might be different on your stove, so make sure you take down those notes, because medium induction, it's a little more precise because it's magnets heating up together and it heats up perfectly. Whereas sometimes electric takes a little longer to heat up. Gas stoves heat up really hot, so sometimes medium might be too hot, but just you'll kind of learn that over time. Let's go medium. We'll let it preheat. We're gonna do 1 to 2 teaspoons of oil. I don't need a lot because I'm gonna saute the onions. So I'm gonna let this preheat for about 30 seconds. You'll eventually start to see that the oil starts to move around more fluidly like water. That's a good sign that the oil is ready and hot. If you're unsure, grab a little piece of onion. Boom, it sizzle. That's why I like stainless steel. Heats up really fast. We're gonna throw our onions. First, we're gonna start out with onions. So we're gonna caramelize them. You can cook them for 5 to 10 minutes if you're like really trying to extract a lot of flavor. I sometimes want to cook things quickly because we already spent a lot of time prepping, so a light saute works really good for me. So I'm just gonna let this cook for a few minutes. Smells really good. I wish you guys can smell this through the video. So we're gonna let this go on medium. While this starts to kind of lightly saute, we're gonna go over and check our sweet potatoes. So sweet potatoes are looking awesome. They're almost like cooked all the way. It still needs about like 5 more minutes. So I think that's another thing with ovens. Depending on your oven, it also changes a lot. But I like it. It has the browning I want. It's not too oily. So yeah, I mean, just keep an eye on it if you need to, but about 20 minutes or so. I'm going to put it back in there, and then we're going to finish cooking the veggies, and then we'll have tacos in a few minutes. Alright, so onions are grabbing a little bit of color. They might not get that much color if you're using like non-stick pans, which is okay to use. But I'm just letting you guys know if you need to add oil to those that have stainless steel. For those that have non-stick, you don't really need to add a lot of oil. The next thing I'm going to go do is I'm going to start adding my celery. About another 2 teaspoons of oil. I'm going to stir it maybe for less than 5 seconds. If your pan starts to get too hot, you have to lower it. So again, I know watching videos sometimes is not as easy than being in front of someone and letting them know that their heat's too hot. So you just kind of make sure you're checking, make sure you're getting some browning. Once I start smelling the celery and the onions, then I move over to my fresh corn. Those using canned corn, you might have extra liquid, so it might take longer to cook. But at least know that regardless of the corn that you're going to use, you still want to give it a little bit of flavor. So we're going to start to saute everything together. The final touch after a few minutes, once things start to look a little like translucent, they're going to start to change color. It's almost like you can see the onion go from its original form to a little more caramelized, see-through type of onion. Same thing with celery. Everything starts to take a different color. As a chef, I recommend to taste as you go if you need to, especially if you're plant-based cooking, because with protein, I would be a little scared to taste chicken if I wasn't too sure. So we're cooking plant-based items. It's always okay to taste as you start doing things. Now that I started smelling and visually looking for browning, the last thing I'm going to be doing is adding my garlic. So it's a quick dish. Once you start cooking, it does come together really quick. I know it takes a little longer because of all the things that we're doing, but you can get this done under like 30 minutes. Garlic is going to go in there for flavor, so I don't really want to cook it too much. I just want it to be there. I'm going to go over to my beans now. So I think all the stuff that I needed, I can smell it. So we're going to add the beans now. The beans have a little bit of moisture and so does the corn. But if your pan is too dry, add like about 1 to 2 tablespoons of water to hydrate it. If you want to get fancy, sauteing. You should definitely start practicing with some dry beans so that you're not always like stirring or scraping your pot pan. You guys can see, I mean, there's so many veggies in here. It smells really good. Now I'm going to lower it to like a medium low. So that's like maybe lower for some people. That's going to be about a 4 for induction, but maybe lower than medium for those using gas. Those using electric, maybe a 4 as well. It all depends. Keep it below what you started. That's basically it. Then we're going to start making our taco seasoning. So you don't have to like make this in advance if you don't want to, because I don't like dishes. So I have all my little containers of seasoning. I have cumin, I'm going to substitute chili for paprika because I don't want too much kick right now. But if you want the original recipe, we'll have chili. So I got garlic powder, cumin, onion powder, basically any type of spice that you like, grab it. So we're going to do one of each. So if you're like me and you want to like memorize measurements, I do ratios. So I do like 1, 1, 1, 1. So 1 teaspoon of each spice. If you don't like cumin, like I mentioned earlier, I don't like the overpowering flavor of cumin, so I'm only gonna add about half a teaspoon. But everything else is gonna get 1. So 1 teaspoon of paprika, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, and I'm kind of wiping it as I go because I'm using the same one, the same measurement spoon, and then 1 teaspoon of the onion powder. So now that we have all the spices, you can obviously put them away and start mixing everything together. And we'll stop right here. Alright guys, we're down to our last step. So that's like checking to see that your veggies are not sticking. I always like to keep a little squeeze bottle. So I'm going to sprinkle about 1 tablespoon of water. It smells really good. We're going to taste it. Has some good veggie filling. So now that we've tasted it, I don't want to add sweet potatoes because they already have a crunch, they're sweet. That's going to be like a topping. But if you want to mix everything together, go for it. The last component of the dish is our tortilla. And that's whole wheat tortillas. You know, it's always better, natural. So I really don't like flour tortillas, but if you want to, go for it. But I always prefer to go the healthy route, whole wheat, or use corn tortillas. But assembling the taco, you can heat this up on flame. I prefer flame. I don't have flame. Char it on both sides, maybe like a griddle, like a quesadilla. Sprinkle your filling directly on top. Finish it off with some of the potatoes. I already tasted the filling itself, guys, and I didn't even do a lot of salt. The seasoning itself, the taco seasoning, made it awesome. But that's it. You have yourself a delicious corn, black bean, sweet potato taco. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. Bye, guys.